Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Anna and in today's video I'll be sharing some of the books that I read in my past, basically, so a kind of reading history. It's very rainy and dreary outside, we have a fire lit here, so it feels a bit like telling a bit of a story, and I'm going to take you on a journey through my reading past, because obviously, as it did with most people, probably it changed quite a bit what I've read. I read a lot as a child, also as a teenager, and especially at that time I kind of switched to reading in English a lot, so I'll be talking a bit about that. But there was actually also a period in my past when I did not read a lot, so several years actually while I was studying English, curiously, I did not read much apart from the books or the text that I had to read for university, obviously. So yeah, let's just go take a look, grab something to drink, we might be here for a bit. So let's get through all of the books that I have here. This is one of two stacks. Yeah, so basically as a child my mom always tells me I love books, she always had to read to me a lot, but I'm going to start now basically with books that I've sort of been reading myself. And the first, well, not really book, but author that I read a lot of different stories of, so this is just one example of a book that I read by her, is of course Swedish author Astrid Lindgren. So this is a book, a German book. It's an anthology of different kinds of Christmas stories from her various books and characters, Pippi Longstocking and many others, of course. Basically a lot of her famous Christmas stories. There are a lot of lovely illustrations in here, so very great for a kid. All of her lovely stories that focus around Christmas. So I read a lot of Astrid Lindgren, mostly of course because obviously as a young child, in the beginning at least, you read what your the books that your parents give to you or that they've read to you when you were younger. And my mom is a big Astrid Lindgren fan as well, so that's what I like to read. That's kind of what stuck in my mind, one of the first books or authors really that I loved as a child. Now when I grew up a little bit, a few years down the road, maybe when I was 10, 11 or so, another author that I read a lot of, and that's also not very unusual, I think that's probably the same for many kids or girls my age or maybe a bit younger or older, is anything by Enid Blyton, more or less. This is again just an example of one of the books that I had here at hand. This is Dolly. The English title of that is actually Mallory's Hours, quite a different title in German. So that, I read all of the 5 adventures and things like that. Some of her other books as well, which I really loved, and I think it made me dream of being at school in England and at a boarding school in particular, kind of romanticizing that idea. In the end, I think I'm very happy that I was not at the boarding school, but at the time I really fancied that. So anything by Enid Blyton, really. And then of course I have to mention after that, again, not very unusual for anyone sort of my age, early 30s, Harry Potter, of course. Obviously I didn't start out with this edition. This is the illustrated edition of the Philosopher's Stone in German, actually. I bought this one very recently only. I reread the book, and I actually bought the German version in this case because I thought maybe at some point in a couple of years' time I'll be able to read that to my son if he's interested in that, so that's why I got the illustrated edition in German. But of course, Harry Potter, everything, again, as it's probably the case for many of you, I waited and waited for the next book. I love the films, I reread the books a couple of times, and actually that is one of the first books where after reading it at least once through the series in German, that I started reading in English. I think it's actually the final book of the series, The Deathly Hallows, that I only own in English. So when that came out, obviously the reasoning behind that was that I didn't want to wait for the German translation to come out. So I read it in English, and of course it was tricky, it was difficult for me at the time. I don't know exactly how old I was, maybe 14 or something like that. But obviously it helped me a lot with my English. So Harry Potter again. Then I entered into a phase, maybe around the same age, I'm not exactly sure anymore, where my reading maybe differed a little bit from that of other girls or other teenagers. And I started to read more kind of serious books. One that stuck very much in my head, and also the author I read a lot from at that time is Norwegian author Jostein Gaarde, and this is Sophie's Welt, the German title, Sophie's World in English. So this is basically the story of a teenage girl in Norway who suddenly starts to get some kind of mysterious letters. She doesn't know who they are from, wondering or posing questions such as, who are you? Where do we live? What is this? Kind of philosophical questions that she is wondering about, like, first of all, who is sending me these kind of letters, and then of course also the kind of questions that are posed in them. And this book basically takes you on a journey through the different philosophers, but main philosophers in history, sort of exploring and explaining in a very perceivable way how philosophers thought, what their main ideas were, and so on, wrapped into a nice story. I know that I struggled a bit in the beginning to read this book, but I was really interested in it, so I kept going, and in the end it was absolutely worth it. I love this story. As I said, there are a lot of other books by him that I also read. Some I like more than others. Maybe I'll do a specific video about Jostein Gaarde at some point. But this one definitely stuck out for me. In a similar vein, I read the book in German, Theo's Reise. The English title I had to look up because it's originally by a French author. It's called Theo's Odyssey. And this, kind of in a similar vein as Sophie's World, is about a boy, a teenage boy who falls ill. And his aunt takes him on a world trip, basically trying to find a cure for his illness. And while they travel around the world, and the stops that they are made are basically all connected to religion. So this book is basically exploring different religions, where they come from, their main ideas, their main representatives, and so on. So again, kind of heavy stuff maybe for a 14 or 15-year-old, but that's something that I really enjoyed at the time. Similarly, after that, I really got, I don't know exactly the order in which I read what, but what I have in mind is a book that says nothing. I think I bought this at a flea market at some point, and it probably had a dust wrapper at some point. It doesn't now. It's called Der griechische Schatz, The Greek Treasure in English, by Irving Stone. And this is telling the story basically of, what's his name again? Sophia und Heinrich Schliemann. Yeah, so the people who basically are said to be responsible for discovering Troy. So a bit of, but it's kind of fictionized. An account of that. Basically, this one I chose as a representative for a lot of historical novels that I read at the time. Historical fiction, of course. Another one that stands out that I don't have here right now is The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett, of course. Die Säulen der Erde in German. It's one of my mom's favorite books, so I thought I should read it as well, and I absolutely loved it as well. Another or two other German authors that I read a lot of at the time, because at that time I read mostly in German, are Petra Dues-Benning and Peter Prange. I'll actually haven't checked, but I will if any of those are available in English as well, and if so, I will put a link to that as well in the description box. So kind of philosophical, religious, historical kind of reading phase before I moved on then to reading in English mostly. That was when sort of my English improved. That was one of my favorite subjects at school. I loved the language. Also a lot inspired by watching the Gilmore Girls in English at some point, which was really hard in the beginning. If you know that TV show, they speak really fast. So for a non-native speaker who doesn't have English around herself, around her all of the time, that's really difficult to understand at some point. But it really inspired me to look into some classics of English literature, some traditional sort of children's books classic. First of all, The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, Der geheime Garten in German, of course. I think most of you will know the sort of the main content of this children's story, actually, where a little girl is sent to live with her uncle because her parents died in India, and she kind of discovers a secret garden in her gloomy uncle's manor. There's also sort of the story with her cousin who's kept secret kind of, a lovely little story, and absolutely lovely to read as a sort of beginning reader of English that is a little bit more advanced than rather starting with children's stories. And then, of course, in the same vein, Little Women. It's actually, I remember taking this book with me when I was on the bus on the way home from school or to school. I read that a lot. A book that I still love today, of course. At the same time, I thought I'd mention that as well, not because it's necessarily the greatest book I've ever read, but because maybe it's a book by the same author of Little Women, Louisa May Alcott, 8 Cousins. It's also sort of a short series, I think 3 or 4 books maybe. Basically also telling the story of sort of an old-fashioned girl growing up. I'm just going to read the back maybe of this one. Left as an orphan after her father's death, Rose Campbell is sent to live at the Aunt Hill with her 6 aunts and 7 rowdy boy cousins. For someone who is used to a girls' boarding school, it all seems pretty overwhelming. Her guardian, Uncle Alec, makes her eat healthy things like oatmeal and makes her wear drab, sensible clothes. Will Rose ever get used to her uncle's crazy notions and all her noisy relatives? So, yeah, it's just another lovely book, and I also read the sequels written by Louisa May Alcott. Maybe not as well known as Little Women, but also absolutely a nice read. And then for the final book that I have here actually is also again just a representative of the whole sort of genre, and just an example of the author that I read at the time. And that is sort of a compilation. It's quite big. The first 3 novels by Ian Rankin, featuring Inspector Rebus. So Rebus, the early years, it says here, Noughts and Crosses, Hide and Seek, Tooth and Nail. So these are the 3 books included in this volume. If you're not familiar with Ian Rankin's Inspector Rebus, he's kind of, I like to say, kind of anti-hero detective, or protagonist, obviously. He works in Scotland in the police department, and yeah, he's not a very likable character at first, or in some ways, let's say. He doesn't do what he's told. He drinks a lot, and yeah, does things that are maybe not very advisable, especially being a police officer. But he's a great character, and Ian Rankin's writing style is absolutely fantastic. So that basically represents a period when I read a lot of crime stories. Different from today. Today I read mostly sort of cozy crime stories, but this is definitely still a book or an author that I would always pick up again. I have the latest Ian Rankin still waiting for me to be read. Again, yeah, I read a lot of crime fiction at the time. Agatha Christie, that is obviously cozy fiction, but that is sort of a classic that I always picked up whenever I felt like reading something, a crime story that was kind of chill and easygoing. These ones I read partially in English, partially in German. Another author that comes to mind from that sort of time period is American author Elizabeth George, featuring her British sort of police duo Inspector Lindley and Sergeant Havers. Also fantastic if you've never heard of them. Inspector Lindley is basically an upper class detective working at Scotland Yard, and he's paired up with a sort of working class, lower middle class Sergeant Barbara Havers, who doesn't get along with him at all because she thinks he's just so fancy and he has his airs and whatever. But in the end, they really grow together as a team, and they solve a great number of cases. And especially from her, the early books are the ones that I like best. Yeah, so that was basically a bit of a walkthrough of what I liked to read. What I currently read is in some ways maybe still similar, in some ways a bit different. Obviously that's something that I will hopefully share with you in upcoming videos, the books that I'm reading now and so on. But now coming towards the end, I wanted to say a few things about something that I've hinted in my first YouTube video actually, that most of the books that I read right now are in English. And a bit of why. Obviously I'm German, so why do I read a lot in English? I mentioned a little bit earlier that in school I really liked English, I liked the language. And apart from reading Harry Potter, where I just didn't want to wait for the German release date or the German translation, I also even then got into reading in English because at some point I thought it's just nice to read the original of something. And of course that way my understanding of the language improved, and in the end I ended up studying English. So I've got a master's degree in English and social sciences. So that's something that stuck with me throughout my studies. I read 90% of this kind of in English. And especially with novels nowadays, I prefer reading them in English if they are written by an English-speaking author, obviously. So anything, mostly, for the most part, any books that are written by an English-speaking author, I will read in English, unless, obviously, I'm just book shopping here in a bookshop and I find a book that I like and it's just available in German. So then I will pick it up in German. Another reason why I might read a book by an English-speaking author is if I think that's a book that my mom would also like to read, then I might also pick it up in German so she can read it as well. But otherwise it's mostly English. And then again, of course, if it's a German author or an author who writes in a different language apart from English and German, then it depends a little bit if I read the German version or the English one, depending on what I see first, maybe also a little bit which cover I like better. Yeah. So that's just a bit of background that I wanted to give, so you get a bit of an idea which books, why I read in German, which books I'll read in English, and so on. It's of course a shame that sometimes if I read a book by a German author that has not, at least not yet, been translated into English, again, I'm not sure what to do exactly in these kind of videos. If it's a great book and I would like to talk about it, maybe I should include it just in case it gets translated into English at some point. Also then, I guess many of you will also be from Germany, so maybe the German version is not a problem at all. Let me know what you think. Should I include them? Should I just do additional videos in German? I'm just not sure. Just let me know. So, yeah, that's basically it for now. As I said, in the next kind of weeks, I hope to share with you some of the books that I'm reading currently. I think I'll do a video in the next couple of days or weeks with some of my favorite books from the, current year, from 2021. So that should give you a good overview of what kind of books I'm reading right now, and also which books I'm looking forward to in the coming year. All right. Yeah, so a bit of my reading journey. I hope that you found that kind of interesting. Again, a lot of these books were just an example of an overall genre or author. But yeah, okay, thank you very much for watching and see you next time.